There's a moment we've all experienced, or will at some point, that leaves a sting deeper than we want to admit. It's when someone who once looked at you like you were everything suddenly chooses someone else. Not just someone else, but someone who seems like a safer, smaller version of what the two of you had. And you're left wondering, wasn't the connection real? Wasn't I enough? And worse, why her after everything we shared? Is the hard truth. Lust can be loud, fast, intoxicating, but it's not always rooted in something sustainable. Sometimes you come into someone's life and stir something so real, so undeniable, that it scares the hell out of them. You activate emotions they've never had to feel. You challenge the version of themselves they've been hiding from. And instead of rising to meet that challenge, they run toward what feels easier, what demands less of them, what doesn't require change. So, no, he didn't choose her because she was better than you. He chose her because she was easier than growing into the man who could deserve you. But here's the power move. Instead of trying to prove your worth to someone who couldn't recognize it, you rise, you step back, you let him go. Because real confidence is built in the silence after rejection. When you don't chase, you don't beg, you don't shrink, you glow, you rebuild. And that is what he'll remember. Not the chase, not the lust, but the woman who walked away when he couldn't step up. Let's talk about what really happened, why he chose her after lusting over you, and why it had everything to do with him and nothing to do with your worth. When a man chooses someone else after showing intense desire for you, it often has less to do with the other woman and more to do with the discomfort your presence caused him. Not discomfort in the sense that you were a problem, but in the sense that being around you brought his own limitations to the surface. You represented a version of life, love, and connection that required more of him. You challenged him emotionally, whether you realized it or not. The way you carried yourself, the way you saw through him, the way you held space for a real connection, those things stirred something deeper than he was prepared to face. Lust is easy, it's quick validation, it doesn't demand consistency, vulnerability, or growth. But when someone comes along who inspires more than that, it creates a fork in the road. He either has to rise to the occasion or retreat to what's easier. And if he's not ready to face himself, his fears, his emotional immaturity, his avoidance patterns, he will retreat. Not because you're too much, but because you held up a mirror to who he isn't ready to be. There's a certain kind of woman who awakens parts of a man that scare him. She brings depth where he's used to staying surface level. She asks questions that cut through the noise. She connects in ways that make the games obsolete. And for a man who's still operating from a place of ego, that's not exciting. It's terrifying because deep down he knows he would have to show up differently. He couldn't just perform anymore. He'd have to be real. That's not a small shift. That's an identity crisis for someone who's built their entire dating life around avoiding that kind of exposure. So when he runs into the arms of someone else, someone who doesn't demand that level of truth from him, it's not about her being better. It's about her being more comfortable. She lets him stay where he is. Maybe she's more accommodating, less challenging, or simply doesn't require the same kind of emotional accountability. She fits more easily into the life he's currently living, the version of himself he hasn't outgrown yet. Choosing her allows him to keep his guard up. It allows him to play out familiar patterns without disruption. That's not love, it's retreat. But here's the part that stings the most. When he was around you, he likely felt that spark of something bigger, something he couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. That intensity wasn't just physical, it was energetic. And while that magnetism may have initially drawn him in, it also became the very thing that pushed him away. Because you made him feel seen, and people who aren't ready to be truly seen often disappear. It's tempting to internalize his decision as a reflection of your own value, to ask yourself what she had that you didn't. But the better question is, what did you have that he wasn't ready to meet? That's where the truth lives. You had emotional depth, presence, clarity, and a sense of self. And instead of rising to meet that energy, he chose to fall back into something that wouldn't confront him with those truths. Letting someone like that go isn't just strength, it's wisdom. Because one day, when the illusion fades and the thrill of ease wears off, he'll remember the gravity of what he walked away from, and by then, you'll have grown into someone who no longer needs him to understand it. You'll be too far ahead, not because you needed revenge, but because you didn't need validation. You knew what you were worth long before he could grasp it. One of the hardest truths to accept is that sometimes a man will choose someone else not because she's more extraordinary, but because she allows him to stay ordinary. When he picked her, it wasn't necessarily about chemistry or even deep connection, it was about familiarity. She might have reminded him of a place he didn't have to try so hard. A version of life where things remained simple, predictable, and safe. And for someone who's emotionally unavailable or fearful of true intimacy, that kind of safety is seductive. Because it doesn't stretch him, it doesn't make him question his behavior, and it certainly doesn't demand any uncomfortable growth. Being chosen isn't always about being better, it's often about being easier to digest. When you walked into his life, you carried a different frequency. There was something about you, your depth, your energy, the way you expected real presence, that he wasn't used to. You didn't just want attention, you wanted truth. You didn't want to highlight real, you wanted consistency. And that level of honesty creates pressure for someone who's been coasting through shallow connection. That pressure might have felt suffocating to him, not because of anything you did wrong, but because he wasn't ready to confront who he needed to become, to be with someone like you. So instead, he chose comfort. He chose someone who didn't ask as many questions, someone who didn't challenge his worldview or push against his emotional walls. She may not have sparked the same kind of fire, but she made it easier for him to maintain the identity he'd built. And sometimes that's all a man is looking for. Someone who fits neatly into the life he already understands, rather than someone who inspires him to evolve. But here's what makes this even more painful. Deep down, he probably knew you were different. He knew you carried something rare. He might not have had the language for it, but he felt it. And instead of rising to meet you where you stood, he took a step back into what felt manageable. He told himself stories about why you weren't right for him. Maybe you were too intense, too serious, or too much. But all of that was just noise. Excuses that masked the real issue. He wasn't ready for the kind of love that would require him to drop the mask. We often assume rejection means we lacked something, that we weren't enough, but in many cases, it's the opposite. You were too much for where he was, too self-aware, too honest, too emotionally intelligent, and rather than celebrate that, he ran from it, because being with someone like you would have required him to take full responsibility for himself. No more hiding behind vague text messages or half-hearted plans. No more pretending to be emotionally available when he wasn't. You were a mirror, and mirrors are confronting. In choosing her, he bought himself time. Time to continue avoiding. Time to delay the work he knows he'll eventually have to do. And while that might bring him a temporary sense of control, it's not sustainable. Eventually, the thrill will fade. The avoidance will catch up. And the absence of something real will start to echo in a way he can't ignore. Meanwhile, you'll keep growing. You'll meet people who don't flinch at your depth, who see your energy not as pressure, but as invitation. And when that happens, you'll realize he didn't reject you. He rejected the version of himself that would have had to rise to be with you. And that, in the end, is a decision that will haunt him a lot longer than it ever hurt you. There's something deeply uncomfortable about knowing that you sparked desire in someone, only to watch them choose someone else when it came time to commit. It makes you question everything, your worth, your value, your instincts. But here's what you need to understand. Lust and love are not the same thing. And for some people, they don't even live on the same planet. He lusted over you, yes. He wanted you. He was captivated by your energy, your mystery, your confidence, your uniqueness. But when it came time to step into something real, something grounded, he backed away. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were everything. For many men, lust is easy. It doesn't require vulnerability. It thrives on fantasy, not reality. It's the pull of attraction without the weight of responsibility. And when you walked into his life, you weren't just a momentary thrill. You were a mirror to his limitations. He knew he couldn't just skate by with you. He knew he'd be seen. He couldn't charm his way through it because your attention wasn't bought by surface-level games, and that scared him. So he fell back into old patterns, into what felt manageable, into someone who wouldn't push him out of his comfort zone. She may have felt safer because she didn't demand more. She didn't hold a mirror to his inconsistency. She didn't challenge him to step into his potential. She fit into his current life without making him question the structure of it. And for someone who hasn't done the emotional work, that's incredibly appealing. But here's what he'll never admit out loud. He knows the difference. He knows the electricity you two had wasn't something he'll recreate. He knows what he gave up. And that's what gnaws at him now. Not the loss of something he didn't understand, but the fact that he did understand it and walked away anyway. That's the regret he'll carry long after the passion with someone else fades. Because lust doesn't sustain. It gives you a spark, but it doesn't give you heat. It can intoxicate you, but it doesn't anchor you. He confused the high of the moment with the foundation of something meaningful, and now he's sitting in a reality that may look okay on the outside but feels hollow on the inside. And the worst part? He probably won't even realize what he lost until much later, when life has quieted and he's forced to sit with the truth. You, on the other hand, kept your integrity. You didn't settle for being an object of desire when you were built for deep connection. You didn't beg to be chosen because you knew that if someone needed convincing, they were never truly ready. That strength most people can't match. That's the kind of strength that builds not just relationships, but legacies. So if you're still asking yourself, why her? Understand this. It was never about her being more. It was about her being less threatening to his ego, his avoidance, and his emotional immaturity. And while that may have won her a place next to him for now, it doesn't mean she's won in the long run. Because connection without growth dies. Lust without intimacy fades. And you, with all your depth and heart, will go on to create something real with someone who isn't afraid of the fire you bring. You weren't just a moment for him. You were a wake-up call. And even if he didn't answer it, even if he ran from it, the ring will echo in his mind long after you've stopped waiting for him to pick up. There's a silence a man feels after he's chosen the easy road. It doesn't hit right away. At first, it might even feel like relief. Less pressure, less challenge, a relationship that strokes his ego rather than invites his growth. But eventually, that silence grows louder. It starts to echo in the spaces where something used to feel electric, unpredictable, alive. And that's when it hits him. He traded something powerful for something passive. He remembers the way you didn't try too hard to impress, but still managed to leave him speechless. He remembers the way you never begged for his time, yet somehow he found himself checking his phone for your name. That energy, your energy, doesn't just fade into the background, it lingers. And it's in that lingering that regret begins to seep in. Because the woman he chose may check all the boxes in theory, available, interested, easygoing, but something's missing. And that something isn't small. It's the way you carried yourself, the way you challenged him with kindness, the way you set standards without shouting. That subtle command of your own worth was intimidating at the time, but now it's haunting. Because deep down he knows the truth. He didn't choose her because she was better. He chose her because he felt safer. Men don't always go where they feel most alive. They often go where they feel most in control. And when a man is still tied to his need for dominance, when he hasn't yet stepped into emotional courage, he'll retreat to what strokes that part of him. Being with you made him question his patterns. That was never a flaw on your part, it was a disruption to his comfort. But when someone's used to dysfunction, comfort feels like stability, even if it's just stagnation in disguise. So now he's with someone who doesn't make him think too much, doesn't make him feel too deeply. It's light, maybe even fun, but it's not fulfilling, because fulfillment comes from being seen, stretched, challenged, and connected in a way that scares you a little but grows you a lot. You represented that kind of energy. And even though he may not admit it, that comparison is living rent-free in his head. Every time the conversation with her falls flat, every time he feels a flicker of boredom, every time he wonders why he's not as excited as he thought he'd be. That's the quiet pain of settling, recognizing what you walked away from once it's out of reach. And that realization doesn't always come with a dramatic moment. Sometimes it's slow, a creeping understanding that the person he dismissed is the one he actually needed. You, with your standards, your patience, your warmth wrapped in steel, were never too much. You were, in fact, the right amount of everything he wasn't ready to receive. And while he may go on pretending like he made the right choice, that pretense becomes harder to keep up with time, because time has a way of revealing the truth. What starts as novelty begins to dull. What seemed less complicated starts to feel shallow. And what he let go of, that starts to glow brighter in hindsight. Not because you've changed, but because his clarity finally caught up with your value. You never needed to prove yourself to be the better choice. You only needed to walk away without bitterness, trusting that your energy would do the talking. And it has. Because respect doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from knowing your worth so clearly that someone else can't help but feel the loss of it once it's gone. It's a strange irony that someone can crave your energy, indulge in your presence, and still walk away from you for something or someone simpler. What often drives that decision isn't a lack of attraction or connection, it's fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being truly seen, fear of being challenged to rise. So instead, he chooses the easier dynamic. Not better, not deeper, just easier. But what he didn't realize at the time is that your silence, your absence, would speak louder than anything you ever said. Because while he might have walked away thinking you'd chase, thinking you'd try to win him back, what he didn't expect was your complete detachment. And that's what haunts him now. You didn't plead. You didn't post cryptic quotes. You didn't try to show him what he was missing. You simply let go. And in a world where most people try to fill the silence with noise, your peace became a deafening mirror. It made him reflect on what he thought he wanted and what he now realizes he actually needed. You didn't need to argue your worth. You didn't need to prove your loyalty. You just let your actions say, I won't fight for someone who isn't fighting for me. That kind of strength, it's rare. And men don't forget it. Not the ones who truly felt something. They might move on physically, but emotionally they remain tethered to the memory of how you made them feel. And not just the romantic moments, the laughs, the chemistry, the connection, but the way you held your standard. That invisible boundary you set without fanfare, that refusal to shrink just to keep someone around. It echoes in the quiet moments of his new reality. Because here's the truth, what he chose might offer convenience, but it doesn't offer growth. And people eventually tire of comfort when it doesn't come with depth. He remembers how you didn't just show up to be adored, you showed up to build something real. You challenged him, supported him, held him accountable in a way that didn't belittle, but inspired. And now, in a dynamic where everything is easy, there's a hollowness, a lack of meaning. No one is pushing him to be better, and though he might not have realized it before, he now knows how much he needed that. You were the mirror. You reflected both his potential and his fear. That's why he couldn't stay. Not because he didn't care, but because caring that much frightened him. But now that distance has given him perspective. That fear is slowly being replaced by regret, not just for losing you, but for not stepping into the version of himself that could have matched your energy. For not realizing that love isn't about staying comfortable. It's about growing in connection, even when it's hard. And now he watches you thrive, quietly, from a distance. Because that's what he has to do now. Your absence created space for you to glow without interruption, for you to become even more of yourself. And that glow isn't for him anymore. It's for you. But he sees it. And every time he does, it reminds him that what he had wasn't just rare, it was irreplaceable. That's what makes your strength so unforgettable. Not the words you said, not the emotions you expressed, but the choice to preserve your peace. And in doing that, you gave him the most powerful message possible. I was never the one who needed convincing, you were. Now he's left replaying the moments, revisiting the decisions, and realizing too late that letting you go didn't free him. It only made him a prisoner to the memory of what he couldn't hold on to. There's a moment that hits a man long after he's made the choice to walk away or to choose someone else. It doesn't always come right away. It might take weeks, months, sometimes even years. But it arrives, quiet, steady, and unshakable. It's the realization that while he may have had your attention, your affection, and your loyalty, he never had your desperation. You were all in, but you weren't going to lose yourself to keep him. And that changes everything. See, a lot of people confuse giving with losing. They think if a woman gives her time, energy, love, and effort, she must be surrendering herself. But you weren't doing that. You were showing up with an open heart and boundaries. You were emotionally available without being emotionally dependent. You loved him, but you didn't need him to complete you. And while he might have misread that as disinterest or assumed you'd always be there, what really unsettled him, what really stuck, is how whole you were before him and how whole you remained after. That kind of self-possession is magnetic. At first, he might have thought it was aloofness or indifference. He might have even tested you, pulled back, tried to see if you'd chase. But when you didn't, when you let him go without begging, it shook something in him. Because we live in a world where people often chase what's walking away, but you chose peace over drama, dignity over desperation. And that leaves a permanent mark on someone, especially someone who wasn't ready for the depth you were offering. He chose someone who gave him the illusion of being needed, someone who maybe made him feel like the center of their world, and for a moment, that felt good, it stroked his ego, it made him feel powerful. But over time, he started to miss the challenge, the spark, the sense of respect that comes from knowing a woman is with you because she wants to be, not because she's afraid to lose you. You weren't trying to convince him. You weren't fighting to be seen. You were just showing up with your truth. And that kind of presence is unforgettable. Now, in the quiet moments, when the newness wears off and reality sets in, he finds himself thinking about you. Not because you're still reaching out or trying to get his attention. You're not. But because he finally understands the value of what you brought, the emotional safety, the intellectual depth, the way you could read a room, speak your mind, and still hold space for his. That wasn't weakness, that was emotional strength, and it made him feel something he wasn't ready to face, vulnerable. You were the storm and the shelter, the woman who didn't ask him to change, but inspired him to grow. And while he couldn't rise to meet that energy, he can't forget how it felt. Because when someone gets a glimpse of real love, it ruins them for anything superficial. He may have thought he could find something easier, less complicated, but easier doesn't mean better. And now he knows. He chose what was simple, and he lost what was rare. You didn't scream. You didn't chase. You didn't collapse. You evolved. Quietly. Gracefully. And now he watches from a distance as you become even more of the woman he couldn't hold on to. And the hardest part for him? Knowing you're still the same woman, just no longer available to him. The greatest revenge was never anger. It was never loud. It wasn't begging him to see your worth or trying to prove what he lost. The greatest revenge was your peace, your growth, your glow. It was moving forward without needing closure, without needing to be chosen, and without needing to be seen through his eyes to validate your value. Because the truth is, he may have chosen someone else, but you chose yourself. And that choice is what breaks him more than anything. Not because he didn't think you were amazing, but because deep down, he knew you were. He just didn't believe you'd ever walk away without looking back. But you did. And now every moment you thrive without him becomes a quiet reminder that he gave up something extraordinary for something easy. So hold your head high, not because he regrets losing you, but because you never lost yourself trying to keep him. And that's the power, that's the glow. And that's what he'll never be able to replace.